Welcome back to Wake Up America. A stark warning from a four-star Air Force general. Last week, General Mike Minihan sent a memo to the officers he commands where he predicts the U.S. will be at war with China in 2 years. Our Newsmax correspondent John Glasgow is live in the newsroom following this story. Good morning, John.
Hey, good morning to you as well. The words of the high-ranking American military officer are gaining all sorts of attention. General Minihan is predicting that the U.S. and China will be fighting over Taiwan in 2025. So Minihan said that the memo that he sent out is because of both Taiwan and the U.S. will have a presidential election in 2024. The U.S. will be distracted and China would have an opportunity to move on Taiwan. He says, quote, "I hope I am wrong. My gut tells me we will fight in 2025. The signed memo is addressed to all the Air Wing commanders and Air Mobility Command and other Air Force operational commanders as well. So the memo orders them to report all major efforts to prepare for a fight against China by the end of next month. Spoke with a former Air Force General, Blaine Holt, to get his predictions on the future war with China.
A U.S. Air Force general standing up with all of the education and insight that he has to be able to stand up and say, hey, look, I'm not warmongering. I'm not beating any drums of war. I'm just telling you this is very serious and we have to be prepared for it, should it come our way.
So a Defense Department official says in response to the memo that these comments are not representative of the department's view on China, and the focus is to be working alongside the allies to preserve a peaceful, free, open Pacific route.
All right, Jonathan Glasgow reporting live in our Newsmax newsroom. Thank you. U.S.-China relations, to say the least, have not been good over the last several months. The threat of conflict increases by the day, as you just heard. A top U.S. Air Force general says that he believes the U.S. and China will be at war by 2025. Joining us now for more, retired Air Force Brigadier General and Deputy Military Rep to NATO, General Blaine Holt, and Senior Fellow at the Heritage Foundation and former Deputy National Security Advisor Victoria Coates. It is great to have you both on this morning. Appreciate you being with us on a Monday. General, I know that you know General Mike Minihan, who made those comments. I'm wondering if you agree with what he said, that we'll be at war with China in less than 2 years.
Well, I don't know that that's going to be the case, but what I do take to heart is that his memo was not written to America, it was written to his commanders. And when you're looking at the three-legged stool that we've talked about on this show, which is woke culture, the vax policy, the disaster in Kabul, and we see the numbers in retention and recruitment, you have a four-star general looking at his very vital command and saying, we need to increase readiness and we need to watch China. And I don't find anything wrong or warmongering with those remarks. In fact, he's trying to encourage readiness. We did this right at the end of the Carter administration with a thing called Project Warrior to bring back a warrior's ethos to a depleted military. And I think that that's the appropriate role of a commander with his forces.
Victoria, your reaction to those comments?
Well, I would add sort of a fourth leg to General Holt's stool, and that would be the budget issues that we're facing in Washington right now. I mean, we have to be ready for a major military surge. And a lot of my friends are fond of saying, you know, it's 1940, we've got to get ready. The problem is our spending and our deficit are at 1946 levels after the buildup for World War II took place. So we have to get our fiscal house in order so that we can support an effort in the Pacific should it become necessary, particularly in the wake of what will hopefully be the concluded war in Ukraine.
Yeah. General, take a listen to what former Secretary of Defense Robert Gates had to say this weekend on Meet the Press about Vladimir Putin.
Putin believes it's his destiny to recreate the Russian Empire. And as my old mentors, Big Brzezinski, used to say, without Ukraine, there can be no Russian Empire. So he is obsessed with retaking Ukraine. He will hang in there. He does believe that time is on his side, that support in the U.S., support in Europe, and so on will fray. And he's doing what Russian armies have always done, and that is sending large numbers of relatively poorly equipped, poorly trained conscripts to the front lines, and in the belief that mass will overcome.
General, do you agree with those comments? Because I think that the Ukrainian army has done a heck of a job over the last year disrupting what Putin thinks might be his destiny.
Yeah, well, Putin had no idea that he was running into a very determined Ukrainian force that understood it was fighting for its existence and its soil. At the same time, Putin was obviously lied to about the modernization and the readiness of his military by his own people. And now here we are. He's backed into a corner. I don't believe he has a U-turn mentally, but we also don't know what's going on in his inner circle for his sustainability and longevity. But the war is obviously getting to a very dangerous place with the announcement of the tanks. I do believe that the Russians will try to mount a very massive offensive in advance of that type of technology coming to bear.
Okay, we'll keep an eye on that. Victoria, something we're also keeping an eye on, the 2024 Olympics. The Summer Games will happen in Paris. A lot of reporting this weekend about Ukraine. They are in a dispute right now with the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, about Russians being allowed to send athletes to the Olympics in Paris. They want the Russian athletes to be banned. What's your reaction to that? Do you think something like that could happen ahead of the Summer Paris Games?
Well, it's really outrageous, and I think particularly if this war continues to grind on, the idea that you're giving Russian athletes some sort of a neutral flag is really, for want of a better phrase, putting lipstick on a pig. And I think if the Russian athletes would like to say that they are competing completely neutrally, they have no allegiance to Russia, they might train outside of Russia, you might be able to come to some sort of arrangement. But if they're basically there under some thinly veiled guise to be a public relations stunt for Putin, I think that absolutely should be not tolerated, and it's antithetical for everything the Olympics are supposed to stand for.
Yeah, and you think about the Berlin Games before the breakout of the Second World War. I believe they were 1936. Of course, they were in Germany. But imagine if the Olympics were 4 years later, maybe in the middle of the war, 8 years later, 1944. You think German athletes would be allowed to compete if they weren't, if they were somewhere else, not in Germany? I think it's pretty ridiculous. General, last week a lot was made about these tanks being sent to Ukraine. Poland, Germany, and the United States are all going to be sending tanks. Douglas MacArthur, in the buildup to the Second World War, had a famous quote. Here it is: "The history of failure in war can almost be summed up in 2 words: too late." Are these tanks being sent to Ukraine? Are they too late?
Well, I'm very concerned that the tanks are an insufficient response, both in time, like you say, and in what lethality is coming to the battlefield. Right now, what we've essentially done is recreated the battle lines of World War I in a war of attrition. Where's the air power? If we're going to save lives, we're already in a military war. So it's not the debate we were having this time last year. If we're going to save lives, some form of air power flown by something or someone has got to create decisive effects on the battlefield, or this is just going to grind on. And like I said earlier, the timeline is such, with the logistics of these tanks coming to bear, we're giving the Russians all kinds of time to plan their invasion out of Belarus and possibly a seaborne attack on Odessa from the Black Sea.
Okay, Victoria, 30 seconds. Boris Johnson, former prime minister in the UK, says that he had a phone call with Vladimir Putin, and this was right up during the buildup to the Ukrainian invasion, so a year ago. And he said that he would murder him with a missile strike in Britain. Apparently, this happened during a phone call. What do you make of that?
I read about that this morning. It really is bizarre, and it shows you where Putin's head is. And just to follow up on what General Holt was saying, why wasn't this a good idea to send these tanks 6 months ago? Why was the Patriot only introduced in December? And I think if we're going to resolve this war, we can't let Berlin continually veto what we do or do not send. I think the president owes the American people a clear strategy for victory, and that then work with the Congress to try to get to that victory. But this piecemeal sort of hand-wringing is getting us nowhere, and it's only emboldening Putin.
Yeah, good point, Victoria. General Holt, Victoria Coates, great having you back on. Thanks so much for being with us.
Great to be with you.
Have a good week.
All right.